So and first of all, welcome to the audience. Thank you for picking this one to listen to. I promise you that like if you made it this far, for sure you're gonna have so much fun. Now taking questions from the first question, which is how was I like growing up? Now, I think of course the answer is gonna be biased, but I have quite a bit of memories from my childhood. Thankfully, all of them well preserved, and I keep going back to them. I think I was always very curious and like a curious cat. Uh, I remember as far as back as I can remember when I could speak. There was always this thing that my dad and my mother and I would go for like evening walks, like after having dinner. So we would be on walks, and the entire thing was helps the digestion and it's nice to get some fresh air outside. And back then, when we didn't live in like we weren't in the cities, I live in the small towns of Himachal Pradesh, like really peaceful life. And I would have endless series of questions for my both of my parents, and especially my dad, like, why does this happen? Why does that happen? And I think he was also both of my parents, in fact, were very encouraging in that sense. Like, sure, most parents are encouraging, but eventually they get tired of your questions and they're like, yeah, 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 whatever. Like, they'll find out, they'll try to troll you or something. But both of my parents were very supportive of that, curiosity and this constant questioning. And in fact, that's where I developed this habit of questioning everything in my head and like, just constantly, why does this happen? Why does what happens if you do it that? What happens if you do it that? And I remember like asking my parents the first time. I still remember like I think I was in fourth or third grade or something like that. And then I recall asking, learning about like that people buy the land that they build houses on from the government, and not being able to compute how that works. I'm like, but how? Like, who gave government the right to charge for all of this, right? Like, this was all here before the government was there. And all those sort of questions, right? Which I don't know if like how many people will be curious. From that to like, oh, what will happen if we bring the moon on the earth? Can't we keep a dolphin in our like bathtub? So and things like that, like always curious. And I also remember like growing up. I wasn't too much into most kids are into like sports and stuff like that. But while I enjoyed conversations and talking a lot, so much so that I would be one of the talkative kids, but I also loved reading and just being lost in my own thoughts. And I was always left there because anytime anybody forced me to, including sports teacher, that tried to force me into like some sort of like go play this sport or whatever, I would screw it up so bad that like, okay, fine, yes, do you whatever you like doing, right? Like so. In fact, I remember even in 10th grade, like the senior secondary school and everything, I would as soon as the school would finish, I would be found at British Library, Chandigarh, just making some new friends, diving into random topics. And I remember when TV finally came around, for the longest time, we did not have a TV at home. And that was on purpose. I think my parents were like, no, like we've seen the bad impact it has, so we're not going to have TV. Or if we have TV, it's only going to have DD1. So what are you going to watch? Right. So when finally TV did come, or I would visit my relatives and they had a TV. There were three things I was obsessed with. One is cartoons, like most kids are. But I was also obsessed with art. So, like I would draw and paint. So that wasn't as frowned upon because they knew that I would be drawing that in a while, like after watching a lot of cartoons. So it was looked at more productive than other kids watching of
Mm.
cartoons. And then I would be fascinated by Discovery Channel, right? Especially the space exploration programs, right? Like, I remember Discovery Channel used to have these 5 minute sequences as well, where they talked about Voyager 1 and 2 going out of like, and something being planned, etc. I think the recent telescope that went out, that been planned for like 30 years or so.
Yeah.
There was also Discovery Short, and there were longer series like Origin of Universe series and this thing. I was obsessed with that. Like my parents knew there's a show coming up on Discovery about like space or exploration or something like that. So I'm gonna be like glued to the screen. So these were some elements that I strongly remember that were recurring themes
Mm.
throughout my childhood. And when you're consuming, at least not today's Discovery Channel, like but back then it had amazing documentaries, right? Like, and documentaries like take you on a different journey. They will put they'll put experts, and then you could look them up on books and connect those dots. So as and when I always remember when I got access to more information, more knowledge or sources of information, I would just jump at that. I remember I in Himachal, the school I was in, initially we had a very small library, and over time as school became more prosperous and became bigger, we finally got more and more books. And I remember at that time when there were like about 5,000-ish books in, not 5,000, like what, 1,000, 1,200 odd books in the library. I had read at least half of them, or at least skimmed through half of them. And I would just like get lost in books. If I'm left with a book, I'm just reading. Like I would forget eating, if it's morning, if it's evening. And that was the case with fiction and non-fiction both, but I always loved non-fiction more. At least found it more engaging. And yeah, so I think that growing up, those are the couple of things that stand out. And daydreaming is another thing that comes to mind. Like I've always been a daydreamer, and I used to love walking. So most people like would either have a cycle or like whatever, and I just preferred walking. And even till date, I love walking a lot. So I would just walk for like long this like going to shop to grab bread or whatever, and I would take a walk, and I would just be thinking by myself, like throughout the walk, just deep in thought. And that's what I do to even today. Like if I take a flight or a bus or whatever, either I'll sleep or I will be thinking deep, right? Like some deep thoughts, like just looking outside, staring at the clouds or the stuff passing by, and just being deep in thought. There's something about like motion, like whether I'm walking or like in something a moving vehicle. It just is very nice to think about things and easy to think about things as things fly by. So yeah, I think daydreaming and just hyper curiosity and constant stream of questions. And I most of the topics I think I was interested in. I can't think of topics that I was really not into. I think except
Mm.
with the exception of sports or something like some of those topics, every topic under the sun was like like interesting. Even in sports, like I think this the rules of the game etc. did not interest me a lot. Like I've not been a fan of cricket, and growing up in India, if you don't like cricket, you half of them like literally most of the India can't relate to you. But I think I saved all of that time and like learned about other stuff with the amount of cricket matches. So I don't relate to that, right? Like so that way, growing up, I was very different from most of the people that I around who were either like, why would you read on like like already there is like school and you have to read and then you have to give an exam and you want to read more books apart from that. Like, why would you do that?
Mm.
Right? So those were the people at least I was surrounded by initially, but eventually you grow up, and as I moved to bigger cities, I had more variety of people I could get exposure to, and that's when I found more people like who were of my tribe
Yeah.
in that sense, right? Who were also curious, who would also prefer company of a book rather than like I don't know, so watching the next World Cup or some stuff like that.